General Hospital spoilers tease that Lucas Jones had always believed in balance, between heart and logic, between healing and restraint. But that balance was unraveling. There was something about the way Maxie had spoken the last time they met, something veiled behind her exhausted eyes, behind the hurried tone. As if she were swallowing words before they reached the air. And Lucas, more than anyone, knew how to read silence. He had learned that during his years in Port Charles. Money had always flowed into it with a strange rhythm, spurts of generous funding, then sudden withdrawals, only to reappear again with different names on the accounts. Still capable of defying the collective decision to do nothing. But doing nothing had never been Maxie's way. She had been through too much, loss, betrayal, survival. Lucas knew her resilience was unmatched, but even the strongest can be broken if they're isolated long enough. And now, Maxie was standing on the edge of something far worse than a business scandal. She was close to the fire, and Lucas could smell the smoke. The obsession took root quietly. At first, it was concern. Then it became urgency. And now, it had transformed into a singular focus. Lucas had hoped the chapter had closed for good. But now? Now, there were signals. Anonymous messages. Security footage mysteriously wiped. And worst of all, the suggestion that someone was being held somewhere remote, somewhere no one could reach. Lucas couldn't shake the idea that Sidwell wasn't working alone. That maybe Peter had returned. That maybe the two had found a shared purpose in eliminating Maxie's resistance. Whether by fear or by force, they wanted her silenced. But Maxie wasn't just resisting them, she was trying to escape. Lucas could see it. The rushed decision to pull her kids out of school. The hints she dropped about needing a break. She wasn't planning a vacation, she was planning an exit. And that terrified him even more. Because running without protection would make her an easier target. If she disappeared, it could be explained away, rationalized by those who didn't know better. But Lucas knew better. And he couldn't let that happen. So he changed. Slowly at first. A quiet call to Dante, pretending it was a friendly catch-up. A visit to Max Scorpio under the guise of concern for the kids, but really to gauge how much the family knew. But none of them understood the full scale of what Lucas had begun to uncover. He started keeping files, documents, screenshots, recorded calls. He began monitoring Sidwell's known associates. He memorized license plates, dates, phone numbers. He became a guardian in the shadows. She might not survive. It wasn't long before Sidwell caught wind of someone sniffing too close to his secrets. Lucas could feel the eyes on him, at the hospital, in the parking lot. The man he used to be, the man who once trusted the system, believed in justice, and waited for others to act, was gone. What remained was someone sharper. Someone willing to bend the rules. Someone who would do whatever it took. Because Maxie wasn't just someone to him. She was a tether to the life he had always wanted. A life filled with love, loyalty, and meaning. And if she fell, that part of him would die with her. So now, as danger circles closer, as Sidwell's web tightens, as the shadows deepen around deception and its fractured leadership, it wasn't just about protecting Maxie from legal repercussions or from the collapse of deception, it was about protecting her from a man who had proven time and time again that he would destroy anyone who stood between him and the woman he believed was his. Peter had always viewed Maxie as his possession, not a person. And now, through Sidwell, he was tightening that grip once more. This revelation triggered something terrifying in Lucas, an emotional and psychological shift that would come to redefine him. The anxiety that had gripped him for days evolved into obsession. The cautious investigation became a desperate mission. Because Lucas wasn't just fighting against a corrupt businessman now, he was facing a madman who had mastered the art of psychological warfare. Peter was playing a long game, and if Lucas didn't move quickly, the next checkmate would cost Maxie her freedom, or worse, her life. Every strange action Sidwell had taken suddenly made sense. Lucas could practically hear Peter's voice behind Sidwell's, pushing him to isolate Maxie, to threaten her, to drive her into fear-induced compliance. It was classic Peter, psychological domination masked as strategic pressure. And now, the situation was approaching a point of no return. Lucas's days were consumed with tracking Sidwell's movements, analyzing his public statements, comparing them to Peter's known tactics from the past. He studied past cases, interviews, even unpublished police reports. He began seeing parallels others missed, triggers Sidwell responded to that matched Peter's past behaviors. The erratic decisions, the sudden disappearances. The return of old enemies from the shadows, it all pointed to Peter's hand reaching out from wherever he was hiding, molding events in Port Charles like clay in his fingers. The more Lucas uncovered, the more he realized how quickly things were deteriorating. Maxie wasn't just in danger, she was a target. Not just a person in the wrong place at the wrong time, but the very center of a storm that had been building silently for months. Sidwell, under Peter's influence, was no longer playing a business game. He was unraveling. Lucas saw it in his eyes during a brief encounter outside the courthouse, wild, frantic, unanchored. Sidwell was no longer afraid of legal consequences. He was driven by something darker. A hunger to control, to destroy, and Lucas knew that only Peter could push a man that far past the brink. And Maxie, brave and determined as ever, had no idea just how deep the roots of this threat went. She believed Sidwell was dangerous, yes. She knew there were risks. But she didn't know that Peter had returned from the dead, not physically perhaps, but intellectually, emotionally, psychologically, and was operating through the man who now held her fate in his trembling hands. Lucas wanted to tell her, but how could he? How could he convince her of something that even he struggled to comprehend? How could he reveal that her greatest nightmare had not only survived but evolved? This wasn't just a resurgence of an old enemy. This was the birth of a new kind of threat, a hybrid of madness and manipulation, embodied in two men who had become intertwined. Sidwell was the visible threat, but Peter was the architect. And Lucas, whether he was ready or not, had become the only line of defense. The emotional adjustment was no longer a choice, it was a necessity. Lucas had always been the calm one, the healer, the rational voice in chaos. But that part of him was eroding under the pressure. He had begun operating in secrecy, documenting everything, securing files, creating safe communication lines for Maxie that she didn't even know she was using. He made anonymous calls to law enforcement, planted misinformation to throw Sidwell off track, and even confronted Brooke Lynn in private, demanding answers she was too scared to give. He was changing. Every day, he felt himself sliding further from who he once was, becoming someone willing to do whatever it took. The weight of what he knew, what he had to prevent, was too great. If Peter succeeded, if Sidwell snapped, there would be no going back. Lucas wasn't just fighting for Maxie's safety. He was fighting to keep her from becoming a prisoner in a life designed by a man who viewed love as ownership and control as affection. And then, the final confirmation arrived. A recorded call. Anonymous. Muffled, distorted. But unmistakably Peter's voice. Calm. Calculated. Instructing Sidwell on what to do next. Lucas listened to it on a loop, his hands trembling, his breath shallow. It was real. Peter was alive. And he was coming for Maxie again. The implications were devastating. This was more than personal. It was apocalyptic. A new disaster was looming, one that could engulf Maxie, deception, and anyone standing too close. It wasn't just about protecting Maxie anymore. It was about stopping a psychological wildfire from consuming everything. Lucas knew what had to be done. And this time, he wouldn't wait. Lucas had changed. Not in some subtle, abstract way, but deeply, permanently, as if something inside him had fractured and would never quite return to its original shape. He could feel it in the way he breathed. In the way he moved through the world now, quiet, calculated, carrying the weight of a truth too dark to say aloud. It wasn't just that danger had arrived. It had grown roots. It had eyes. It had a name. And its name was Peter. The man they all thought was gone, buried under the chaos of the past, had returned, not with bullets or fire, but with a plan, with a puppeteer's hand. Guiding Sidwell into madness. Lucas had spent days watching everything unravel, watching Maxie pull away from the people around her, believing that she was only facing a business scandal. Unaware that she had already stepped into a snare designed by the man who once claimed to love her. But Lucas knew. He had seen the signs. Sidwell wasn't working alone. His erratic behavior. The threats, the pressure, it wasn't born from his ambition. It was Peter's madness seeping into him, whispering through the cracks of his mind, turning him into a weapon. Peter had returned. Not to ask for forgiveness, not to explain the past, but to finish what he started. To claim Maxie in one way or another. Lucas tried to fight it, at first. Like a doctor clinging to medicine in the face of plague. He tried to find a way out. A way to expose Sidwell, to gather evidence, to bring in Dante or Mac without causing panic. But every step forward was met with a deeper silence, a more profound realization that this wasn't something the system could solve. This was personal. This was war. And war required something Lucas had spent his life avoiding, sacrifice. He began moving differently, not just physically, but mentally. He prepared for the worst. He kept his findings locked away. Encrypted, buried behind fail-safes in case he didn't make it. Because the deeper he went, the clearer it became, he might not survive this. And strangely, that thought didn't terrify him. It gave him purpose. If his life was the last wall between Maxie and whatever darkness Peter had planned, then so be it. Lucas had long given up the illusion of safety. He knew there were moments when good men had to step beyond the lines they once swore never to cross. For Maxie, he would cross them all. But what haunted him most wasn't the idea of dying. It was knowing that even if he did everything right, even if he gave up everything, he might still be too late. Peter had always been 5 steps ahead. Lucas had started seeing it clearly. This wasn't just about obsession or revenge. It was about control. Peter didn't just want Maxie back. He wanted to rebuild the world around her. He wanted to erase everything she believed, everyone she trusted. And Sidwell was his tool to make that happen. Lucas had traced the network. The shell companies. The ghost accounts. The fake investors. Everything pointed back to a single hidden account, funded by a name long thought dead. And when he heard Peter's voice, distorted, low, unmistakable, it confirmed everything. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in silence, staring at the wall, knowing that the storm was no longer approaching. It was already here. Maxie didn't know. She thought she was fighting Sidwell. Resisting pressure, staying strong in the face of corruption. But she didn't know that Peter was standing just behind the curtain, smiling, waiting, calculating. And Lucas couldn't tell her. He couldn't risk pushing her further into fear. He couldn't give Peter the satisfaction of watching her fall apart. So he bore it alone. Each day became more dangerous. Sidwell was unraveling, more aggressive, more erratic. The pressure on Maxie intensified. She became more isolated, more cautious. Lucas could see it. The cracks in her strength. The tremble in her voice. The exhaustion she hid behind forced smiles. And he knew, deeply, painfully, that they were running out of time. This wasn't a warning anymore. This was the beginning of a collapse. Lucas no longer believed he could stop the disaster. He only hoped he could redirect it. Delay it. Absorb enough of the impact that Maxie could escape before the final blow landed. That was the most he could offer now, time. Time for her to run. Time for her to live. He had already written his goodbye in silence. He had made peace with it. Because Peter would not stop. Sidwell was too far gone. And Maxie was already marked. No matter what Lucas did, the damage would reach her. Whether through blood or through memory, Peter would leave a scar. Lucas had once believed in redemption. He had once believed that every broken thing could be healed. But now, as he stood on the edge of something inevitable, he understood that some stories only end in ruin. Some wars demand more than truth. They demand blood. And Lucas was ready to give it. He only prayed that when the smoke cleared, when the screaming ended, Maxie would still be standing. Because he could not stop the disaster. But he could make sure she survived it. Even if he didn't. Lucas had reached a breaking point. Watching from the sidelines was no longer an option. The sense of urgency clawed at him with every passing hour. Every moment Maxie walked through the offices of deception, unaware of just how deep the rot had spread. Sidwell's manipulation. Peter's silent orchestration, it was all converging into something far more dangerous than blackmail or emotional torment. And Lucas, fueled by instinct and dread, knew the truth had to be hiding somewhere in plain sight. So he turned to the one place no one else dared to question, the products themselves. Deception had been the face of innovation and glamour. A success story forged by ambition and resilience. But Lucas understood what most people refused to see. If Peter truly wanted to destroy Maxie from within, he wouldn't just come at her from outside forces. He would sabotage the very foundation she built. He would poison the dream and leave her holding the blame. That's how Peter operated, methodical, cruel, unseen. Lucas gained access under the guise of a concerned investor liaison, but every step he took was deliberate. He collected samples, lipsticks, skincare serums, collagen-infused creams. He even noted the packaging, the serial codes, the manufacturing details. He logged it all, cross-referenced every product batch with its distribution chain. What he was doing was risky. Illegal. Even. But legality no longer mattered to him. If deception was built on a lie, then justice required sacrifice. When the first lab results came back, Lucas sat frozen for nearly 10 minutes. There were inconsistencies. Traces of unauthorized ingredients. Formulas that didn't match official records. Compounds that could cause adverse reactions if exposed over long-term use. Some elements weren't even legal under FDA regulations. And worse, several of these batches had been approved during the exact month Sidwell pushed to fast-track production. Lucas's heart pounded. He double-checked the reports. Ran a second verification. The results were the same. These products weren't just compromised, they were potentially weaponized. It was deliberate. He wasn't looking at accidental contamination. He was staring at chemical warfare hidden beneath marketing gloss. Peter hadn't just come back for Maxie. He was trying to destroy her company from the inside out, one serum at a time. If even one of these products triggered a public health scare, deception would collapse overnight. And Maxie, as part of the executive team, would take the full fall. Lucas knew this wasn't just about business sabotage. This was personal. Peter was staging an emotional and professional assassination. And Sidwell, reckless, arrogant Sidwell, was either complicit or too far gone to realize he was being used as a tool. Each new test result uncovered more discrepancies. Some products were chemically sound but bore forged documentation. Others had altered expiry dates. Even the shipping routes were suspicious, some traced back to shell companies tied to accounts Lucas had already flagged in Peter's laundering network. The more Lucas dug, the more impossible it became to deny. The entire operation had been infected. And now, Lucas had proof. But the truth came with a heavy cost. With every file he collected, he couldn't simply walk into the boardroom and show Maxie a lab report. Not when the walls had ears. Not when Peter was watching every move from behind the curtain. So Lucas crafted a new plan. Lucas suspected he had already begun to suspect him. And Peter? Lucas didn't know where he was physically. But his presence was everywhere. In the supply chain. In the finances. In the formula. Maxie, meanwhile, remained unaware. She had her own battles to fight, her reputation, her role in the company, the emotional fatigue of being gaslit and dismissed by the very people she trusted. But the real bomb hadn't dropped yet. And when it did, everything would shatter. Lucas didn't expect gratitude. He didn't want recognition. He didn't even believe he would survive the aftermath. But he needed Maxie to have a future, even if it was one she'd have to crawl through fire to reach. Because the truths he was uncovering weren't just technical failures or executive oversights. They were a map, leading back to a monster she thought was gone. And now, piece by piece, that monster's plan was being exposed. Lucas had opened the first door. And behind it were the makings of a scandal so devastating, it wouldn't just destroy deception, it would drown Port Charles in consequences. But he would not stop. Because Maxie deserved the truth. And Peter deserved to burn in it.